Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial on this beautiful spring morning.
I'd now like to invite Major General Michael Jeffrey to deliver the commemorative address.
Let's now talk about this very fine fighting battalion, the 2nd 16th. Who were they? After a very distinguished battle record in World War I as the 16th Battalion, World War II saw it re-raised in April 1940 as the 2nd 16th in Western Australia as part of the 21st Brigade of the 7th Division. And by October of 1940 the battalion was bound for the Middle East, its first campaign being the Allied offensive into Lebanon and Syria. Potts, for his leadership against the Vichy French during the Syrian campaign, was awarded the Distinguished Service Order and again mentioned in dispatches for leadership in action. And indeed my own uncle, Captain Ivan Johnson, was killed at Litani River with the 2nd 16th, and for which I've never quite forgiven the French, although I married a girl who does have French connections, so that's generosity, isn't it? But there we are. The 2nd 16th then participated in the attack on Sidon as part of a brigade strength attack that successfully secured the town after 2 days of close quarter fighting against infantry and tanks. The 2nd 16th were then involved in successful operations to capture Damour, the last major area of resistance hindering the Allied advance on Damascus and Beirut. The Syrian campaign cost the battalion 267 casualties, wounded or killed, and won it the honour of leading the Allied march into Beirut in July 1941. And I think those casualties, the nearest approximation I can make is probably with some of our Australian bomber squadrons, 460, 465, who suffered huge turnovers of personnel because of their loss rates. But that loss rate of 267 casualties in the Syrian campaign was a huge one for any battalion to suffer. The battalion returned to Australia, and after jungle training in Queensland was shortly again in action in Papua New Guinea on the Kokoda track. Kokoda was captured by the Japanese on July 29, 1942, and with the Kokoda airfield now lost, the newly appointed New Guinea commander, Lieutenant General Sidney Rowell, immediately dispatched the 21st Brigade, including the 2nd 16th, to retake the village of Kokoda. Now Potts, as the newly promoted commander of the brigade, and I think at about the age 46 or thereabouts when most people are retiring, but he was so fit and capable, there he was, commander of the brigade. He reached Alola, some 10 kilometres south of Kokoda, on the Owen Stanley Range on 23rd of August, and immediately took command of the remnants of the exhausted Maroubra force. And on the 26th of August he reinforced the 39th with his own 2nd 14th and 2nd 16th battalions, fit, tanned and superbly trained from the Syrian desert. And although outnumbered 5 to 1 and without supplies of food and ammunition, they held Isarava for 4 days of bitter fighting against fanatical Japanese attacks, where hand-to-hand combat using bayonet, boot and grenade was a regular occurrence. In deciding his future course of action, Arnold elected to conduct a fighting withdrawal rather than obeying impossible orders from high command to move forward and attack a greatly superior and better armed enemy. He formulated a tenacious withdrawal strategy with carefully planned ambushes and vicious limited assaults as the appropriate tactic. When Arnold and his now greatly diminished 2nd 14th and 2nd 16th battalions withdrew to Mission Ridge, commonly known as Brigade Hill, roughly 30 kilometres south of Kokoda village, he was then reinforced by his 3rd Battalion, the 2nd 27th. And under the most trying conditions, these 3 battalions fought a short, desperate brigade defensive battle that inflicted further delay upon the Japanese. With heavy casualties on both sides, this critical hold-up in time finally exhausted the tenuous supply line of the enemy commander, General Hurry, who had necessarily relied on a strategy of speed with its attendant risks to his logistics to capture Port Moresby. I forget now, but I think he was planning on something like 14 days, and that was the logistics he had. And because the 2nd 16th, the 2nd 14th, 2nd 27th Maroubra Force were able to hold the Japanese for much longer, General Hurry and his people ran out of food and ammunition. Ultimately halted in the vicinity of Iribaya Bridge, only 45 miles or so from Port Moresby, the demoralised, starving and diseased Japanese withdrew back along the track, vigorously followed up by fresh battle-trained troops of the 25th and 16th Brigades. More heavy fighting was to follow, but the threat to Port Moresby was over. As a former infantryman who's realistically exercised his own troops, native troops, Papua New Guinea troops across the Kokoda track, I stand in awe of 2nd 16th's achievements on the track in fighting a series of bitterly contested delaying actions down the track. The battalion's gallantry helped save Port Moresby and its strategically important airfield and port, the capture of which would have given control of the Northern Sea and air approaches to Australia, to Japan. But the battalion's war was not over. In November 1942, with the strength of 2 companies, the 2nd 16th went into action at Gona against well-prepared Japanese defences over open ground, and the battalion suffered yet again very cruelly. Only 56 men survived. And unless you've been there and seen it, to sustain casualties of that nature, of your best mates gone or wounded or taken out of action, and then to rebuild that battalion spirit and to keep going over years of conflict, I think is an incredible achievement. And it's what makes really good battalions under the formations, that capacity to keep going when things become extraordinarily difficult. And when you've been chopped down to just 56 people in your 2-company battalion, that's a big loss and pain to bear. The following year, in August 1943, the 2nd 16th returned to New Guinea, participating in the 7th Division's campaigns in the Markham River and Ramu Valley areas. And the 2-day battle for the capture of the 5,000-foot Razorback ridgeline of Shaggy Ridge in December of 1943 is almost folklore in Australian military history, with the very heavy casualties sustained and inflicted, the grim hand-to-hand fighting, and the extraordinarily extremely harsh conditions endured. But they did it, and they took Shaggy Ridge in December of 1943, one of the great, I think, battalion actions of the war. The battalion then returned to Australia for a brief period for taking part in the heavy fighting at Balikpapan in July 1944 in Borneo. Patrol operations then followed until war's end in August 1945. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is but a very scant outline of the magnificent fighting history of the 2nd 16th, and I've tried to bring it into the scope of the whole of the Kokoda campaign in particular. But I hope serves to emphasise what today's dedication is all about. And it's about remembering those thousands who passed through its ranks and who truly lived the 2nd 16th motto, loyalty and comradeship. These young men were loyal to the mates who served beside them and the battalion family that was their home and focal point for almost 6 years. Loyal to a way of life based on mutual respect, battle discipline, physical courage and humour, and I would strongly suspect based on an intense love of and pride in their country. It's totally appropriate, therefore, that their sacrifices be remembered, appreciated and respected through the aegis of the plaque that is about to be unveiled in the beautiful grounds of our National War Memorial. To those remaining veterans present here today, may I, on behalf of a grateful nation and as a fellow infantryman, thank you all personally and your families for the service you so nobly provided for our country at a time of its greatest peril. Thank you very much. Thank you.